I was born in the former Soviet Union, in Russia, and when I was a kid, I used to like reading science fiction stories, and in particular, there were these two brothers, the authors of science fiction, that were quite famous in Russia. I don't think they're well known in America. Even a lot of their books are not even translated into English. But in the Soviet Union, they were probably the most well-known science fiction writers. Their last name was Strugatsky. Two brothers, A and B Strugatsky, Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. So in one of their books about, of course, some other planet, they often discuss interesting and deep topics. They raise important questions, but the setting is science fiction setting, so it's happening on some other planet, but the ideas can be applied to our society, a lot of these ideas, and I'm going to say in the end why I'm telling you all this. So anyway, there was a certain planet where everybody believed that they're not on top of a sphere like any other planet. In their worldview, their cosmology was that they're inside a sphere, meaning that this is how their world, in their point of view, looked like. Today, of course, almost everybody knows that the Earth is spherical. But it's known that in ancient times, a lot of people believed the Earth is flat. There are very few people left like that today, but there are some, but very few. But I don't think anybody ever heard of a third theory, that the Earth is neither flat nor spherical, but the opposite. We're inside a sphere, meaning that this is what the cosmology of this particular planet was. They assumed that there is this huge material that fills the whole world, and inside of it there is like a bubble in which there is some kind of light. It wasn't exactly clear what the nature of that light is, but it appears and disappears from time to time, meaning the sunrise and sundown, right? They've looked at it as some kind of a inside light inside the sphere that sometimes appears, sometimes doesn't appear. And the people live within that sphere, meaning the gravitation is towards the opposite direction, towards the outside. So we all live within that sphere. So of course that cosmology did not allow for any other planets to exist, because in their worldview there's only one world where they live, and it's a concave, I guess, sphere. They're inside a sphere, and the light is on top of them, in the middle of that sphere. Now, why would they come up with this weird theory? Well, the flat Earth theory has a problem as soon as the people of the particular place are able to encircle the world. This rejects the flat Earth theory. The truth of the matter is there are other ways to prove the Earth is not flat. There are even ways to calculate the Earth is not flat to a very reasonable degree. There was this, for instance, great Greek scientist, Eratosthenes. I don't know how many people heard about him. I used to be good in math. I was actually participated in the International Math Olympiad and got a silver medal there when I was a kid, a teenager. So at any rate, what was called, there was a certain method of looking for all the prime numbers. And that method was named after Eratosthenes. So I knew the name from that. But I also read in a certain math and science magazine in Russia long ago that Eratosthenes was the one who calculated the size of the Earth to a very large, with very good accuracy. How did he do it? He looked at the shadow where he lived. This was the time when the Greeks spread all over, including what today is Egypt. This was Greek Egypt, so under the Ptolemies. So he looked at the shadow where he lived in Egypt. Aswan was the place where he lived, and also compared to a different place on the same day. If you compare the shadows, right? If the Earth would be flat, the shadow would be always the same, of course. But if the Earth is not flat, if it's a sphere, then you could actually calculate the radius of that sphere based on what's the angle is, how much it changes the shadow in one place versus a shadow in another. And he got a very, very reasonable estimate. So I'm saying that, of course, it's possible to know the Earth is not flat based on other arguments, not just encircling the Earth. But the final and fully convincing argument, of course, is when eventually Magellan, I think, right, encircled the whole Earth and went to one side and came back from the other side. So this proves that the Earth is not flat. But it doesn't really prove that the Earth is not that we're not inside the sphere. So on that imaginary planet, the people lived inside the sphere, and they knew that if you travel in one direction, you'll get back from the other side, because inside the sphere, the same thing would be happening. But what made them believe, actually, that they live like this? The reason for their strange belief is because the refraction of the light was incredibly strong in that area. The way the atmosphere was very thick, and the refraction of light was very strong. And therefore, it seemed, when you looked at the horizon, it seemed that things are going upwards, not downwards. For instance, ancient Greeks knew that the Earth is a sphere, because they said that if you look far away on the horizon, you'll see how the ship is approaching from far away. And first you see the top of the ship, and then more and more, until the entire ship shows up. So it kind of comes from under. So the Earth is obviously going downwards if you go further. But there, on that planet, the refraction was such that it looked like the ship is coming from up there. So first you'd see the bottom of the ship showing up from far away, and then further and further until the entire ship shows up. So it seems like it's coming from high up there, coming down to you. So therefore, from the ancient times on that planet, people assumed that they're inside a sphere. And like I said, nothing contradicted their assumption, because first of all, if you go around the whole Earth, you still get around even if it's inside a sphere. And the actual sun of that, the star around which the planet was going, that sun they could not see most of the time because of the thick atmosphere. Again, the atmosphere was so thick they never really saw it. They just saw some kind of light. So that's why their theory did not really contradict any of their observations. But over time, they became so convinced of their worldview that anybody who contradicted it would be considered a complete idiot. Not just a heretic, which would be the history of, let's say, the church history on Earth, right? But here the issue was that anybody who contradicted, they thought it was such a bizarre, such a stupid, idiotic thing to contradict this obvious theory. Of course, the world is inside the sphere. So they used to have a special word, a kind of almost a curse word, for any kind of stupidity. Like if they want to compare something to that this thing is so stupid, this idea is so incredibly stupid, they would say, oh, masaraksh. They would like curse that this person is as if he's saying the world is inside down. They're reversing the cosmology of the world. So just as it's stupid to assume that we're on top of a planet, so too is so stupid what you're saying. That was how they looked at things. So I'm wondering sometimes today, do we have a similar situation when people sometimes get accustomed to a certain view, and sometimes it's the majority of people who get accustomed, that anybody who claims the opposite, they simply reject it outright and they say, Masaraksh, this is complete nonsense. What you're saying is a reverted worldview. In particular, this is true about politics. Israel has been doing everything to save as many civilians as possible in the last war and any other war. They're sending millions, literally millions of messages, dropping leaflets with maps, where to go, the safe zone, trying to save as many people as possible, calling, sending WhatsApp messages. And yet, in certain circles, especially among college youth, the propaganda that they've heard from relatively early age, in certain states they teach this complete lies and propaganda from early childhood, that they tend to view Israel somewhat similar to Nazi Germany. I mean, do they really understand what Nazi Germany was doing? Hunting after every Jew, trying to kill every Jew they could? I mean, that's what Hamas did to the Jews, but exactly the opposite of the truth is being promoted. Do they understand what Israel is trying to do and how Hamas is putting their people in the line of fire all the time, trying to get as many people killed so that the world will then claim that Israel is doing genocide? Do they understand what genocide is? Do they understand what Israel is facing? What any country in a similar situation would do? This is complete reversal, total. And this is similar to the idea when people get accustomed that they live inside a sphere, and everybody who contradicts it, they consider it complete nonsense. This is how far things have gone. It's really unbelievable how far things have gone in certain circles. I really hope that, I mean, right now it's not the majority of the world, but on college campuses in a lot of places, it seems to be that the majority of people have been convinced of complete reversal of the truth, complete and total reversal between who really does genocide and who is trying to save people. There was a certain lady that was kidnapped by ISIS and sold over to Hamas, and not a Jewish lady, an Arab lady, and Israel did a whole operation just to save her. It was a whole planning and operation just to save her. So much is done to save her. They found in a hospital little babies that were in the incubators. They took them carefully and moved them to the West Bank. Over there, gave them to the so-called Palestinian Authority just to save them. There's like so much done to save civilians. By the way, in Lebanon, to a larger extent, the people who don't belong to Hezbollah appreciate how much Israel is doing to save those who are not involved, those who are civilians. In Lebanon, they also, there's some propaganda, but to a much larger extent, a larger number of people actually admit and are thankful to Israel for what it's doing. But what is going on in Gaza is like complete lie from the beginning to the end, and the media is, especially the leftist media, is promoting it and creating the picture of the exact opposite of the truth. Anybody who tried to talk to the soldiers, tried to understand what's going on, came to the conclusion that Israel is doing more than any other country in any other time in history to avoid civilian casualties. But even if one would believe that there were ways to avoid more casualties, that there were ways to save more people, at any rate, this is still very far from genocide. Genocide is a very specific thing. When people specifically kill civilians, do you think Israel doesn't have the power to kill civilians if it wanted to? They would be able to, in 2-3 days, kill 1 million people in Gaza if they wanted to. But that's the whole point, that nobody wants it in Israel. Nobody, absolutely nobody wants it in Israel. There was, of course, after what Hamas did on October 7th, and especially when practically all of Gaza was supporting it and cheering to it, there were some people who were saying certain extreme statements. But in practice, it was never implemented, not even close, nothing like that. There's no such thing. Israel follows the rule, and they have courts that check everything. Every operation is approved by legal experts. It's very, very complex, much more than any other army in the world. They do far more than the international law requires. But of course, you could always say that this politician said this or that. Yeah, I mean, you know, if you imagine that if something similar to October 7th happened in America, would the people be screaming and yelling that whoever perpetrated it should be completely destroyed? Of course they would be doing it. But in practice, there's a big difference between what people say and what people actually do. In practice, Israel never does anything remotely equivalent to bombing the civilians. It always tries to save as many civilians as possible. But a lot of times, the civilians are put by Hamas in the most dangerous places, so that as many of them are killed as possible. What for Israel is something they're trying to avoid. For Hamas, it's a big plus because they know the world will be blaming Israel. That's how it is right now. It's absolutely horrid how the world, instead of realizing that they should support Israel, that the only way that fewer civilians will die, if Hamas knows that the world is not going to be on their side when more civilians die, that the world will blame them for every single death of civilians, which is the way it should be. Then Hamas will stop this practice, hopefully. But the reason that Hamas is trying to get as many civilians as possible killed is because they know the world will blame it on Israel. So the world in a way is helping. All those victims are part of the fault of the leftist media that tries to portray Israel as the aggressor. I'm not even saying the fact that, of course, Hamas numbers are inflated. This was proven all over, and even in the very beginning of the war, when Hamas claimed that Israel struck their hospital and 500 people were dead, and it turned out that they themselves, one of their rockets misfired, and it's more like 50 rather than 500 people dead. But at any rate, even if it will be 500, here certainly their fault, but they blame on Israel any kind of death. There's a lot of internal fighting, a lot of times they kill each other and blame it all on Israel. Even people who just die from various other causes, it's all blamed in the statistics on Israel. Hamas doesn't even provide the statistics of actual militants killed. But the true ratio of militants killed compared to the civilians killed is slower, there's fewer civilians killed and more militants killed in this conflict than in any other similar conflict or even remotely similar conflict. When Americans were in Iraq and Mosul, the proportion was worse. When they were in Afghanistan, it was worse. The proportion that of the ratio of non-combatants compared to combatants killed is very good in the case of Israeli war. I'm not even saying that a lot of these so-called non-combatants, like they would call a child, a person who is 18 or 19 holding a Kalashnikov machine gun, but as soon as he's dead, that put him in the statistics of a child who was killed. So there's another problem with all of the statistics. But even according to all of the statistics taken together, even if you take the numbers that Hamas claims after a whole year of war, so few people are killed, this is unbelievable. If Israel wanted to do genocide, they would kill in 2, 3, 5 days maximum. There would be 1 million people killed or more. It's not so difficult. In fact, it's a lot easier. The difficulty is to save civilians, but to kill civilians is very easy. Not difficult at all. Hamas didn't do anything to save the civilians. They didn't even build a single bomb shelter. So if Israel wanted to kill civilians, there would be nobody left today in Gaza. But the whole point is that after more than a year of war, when even naturally throughout this time, even if Gaza was prosperous, they would have thousands of people just die. This is how it is statistically. In a population of a couple of million, thousands die throughout the year. Obviously, Hamas considers them the statistics of war casualties, but in reality, a lot of the people would have died anyway, from all kinds of reasons: old age, sicknesses, etc., etc. There's more food entering Gaza than it was before the war. If there are some people who are hungry, that's because Hamas is stealing the aid, and again, Israel is blamed of starving the poor Gazans. Now, the war again, right after the attack of Hamas, there were some people who were saying we're not going to give electricity to Gaza, etc., etc. But the truth of the matter is, they still weren't saying that we won't allow any electricity into Gaza. They were saying we won't give them. Why should we give them? Can you imagine that if Nazis were killing Jews, and then Jews had a power plant that was actually giving the Nazis electricity? Berlin would depend on some Jewish power plant. Do they have to give them electricity? But even that was never done. It was implemented for a few days. Almost immediately, Israel started supplying electricity, water, and all these other things to Gaza. That's despite the fact that almost the entire population was celebrating and cheering and participating in the lynching. So there's very few actual civilians there. But with all that, Israel treats the entire population that's not holding the weapon against them at the moment, treats them as civilians and tries to give them some kind of a way to survive. Now, of course, it's not 5-star hotel where they live right now. I have real pity on the people who for over a year displaced and living in the conditions they're living. But what choice is there? If the world wanted to help them, they could accept them, at least for a time being, give them some place where they could stay, or pressure Egypt, where there's so much empty space in Sinai, to give them some area where they could stay in better conditions. And then, by the way, the war would have ended much faster. But the world is not doing that. Egypt closed its borders immediately, and nobody was pressuring them. The world didn't accept almost any of these refugees, so-called. And they're living, and Israel is the one that's trying to provide for them reasonable accommodations given the circumstances. Of course, it's not a hotel. Their situation is very difficult. They're suffering. Of course, they're suffering. It's a pity they're suffering. Is there a way to avoid it? Yes, by destroying Hamas and giving them a future, which is what Israel is trying to do. So I hope more people will support Israel and will understand what it's going through.